Not all discomfort is growth. Sometimes it's just your nervous system screaming for air. If you've ever felt like you've had to dim your light just to stay in a relationship, this episode is for you. Welcome back to the Reconnection Co, where healing starts with connection. Now, whilst I am a healthcare professional with over 18 years of experience, I am not a mental health professional yet. I am currently completing accredited training in counselling and mental health. Irrespective of this, none of the content shared on the Reconnection Co platforms is designed to be given as or taken as therapy or mental health advice. It is where I can hopefully help you understand yourself and your relationship dynamics better, and most importantly, it's a place where you can feel seen, safe, and validated in your experiences. Today's episode dives into a concept I've personally lived through in work, in friendships, and very much in relationship dynamics. Growing pains versus shrinking pains. Now, no, I don't mean growing pains in the context of what many children experience, growing pains in a philosophical sense of personal growth. So today we're going to explore what these two contrasting experiences often look and feel like, and how to tell if your relationship discomfort is helping you grow or is it slowly eroding who you are. The frog in boiling water analogy very much applies here, as you'll see. And as we're all about understanding lived experiences and trauma here, we'll dive into how sometimes our trauma histories and emotional blueprints, if we're not aware of them or haven't fully worked through these, can often mistake these dynamics where we're forced into emotional shrinkage for love. And unfortunately, for many, myself included, we may not know that we're either in or have gone through this soul grinder until we're in the thick of it, or have been chewed up and spat out the other end. And I want to help you hopefully try to recognize safe growth versus trauma and trauma reactivation. And of course, we'll wrap up with some practical strategies for you to explore this on your own. Now, this episode does have an accompanying guided journaling session for you to explore these concepts on a little bit of a deeper level. And as always, these sessions are available via the Reconnection Co YouTube guided journaling session playlist. And on that note, if you haven't already subscribed or followed the Reconnection Co on whatever platform you're listening to us on, this is your nudge to do so, as every subscriber, follower, like and share helps our platform grow. So let's get into some growth. Okay, growing pains versus shrinking pains. Let's define the terms so we're on the same page. Growing pains in this context aren't a bad thing. They're what we want. If you remember from some of our previous episodes, we've spoken about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where the upper tiers of the needs pyramid include self-esteem needs, which are also tied to our feelings of being valued, self-respect, being respected and considered by those around us. And the top tier, the unicorn if you will, is self-actualization. This is about reaching your fullest potential once a healthy, stable foundation has been built. We're able to explore personal growth, we're able to explore our creativity and our purpose. But if we're on a rocky foundation, this can't happen. So my concept of relationship growing pains is essentially drawing on Maslow's hierarchy with a nuanced understanding of what may erode or disrupt the foundation of your needs. And attachment theory and internal family systems are essentially some of those elements that we draw on, and it gives us a little bit of an understanding of what may be eroding the foundation. So in relationships, growing pains will often look and feel like where you're being challenged in a way that's healthy and you feel safe and supported exploring the challenges. This can be having a supportive partner who has your back when you're facing a challenge outside of the relationship, or a partner who is receptive to exploring the challenges that may be occurring in your relationship. From these challenges and them being explored in an emotionally safe, healthy, supportive way, you're learning to communicate better, you're learning to set better boundaries, you can feel vulnerable, and you learn to be even more vulnerable. So there's discomfort, but it's forward moving in a positive way. You feel like more of yourself, not less. Now, in contrast, shrinking pains will often look and feel like you might be walking on eggshells. You might not raise issues or concerns with your partner because you fear what the outcome will be. A hint, if you have an underlying fear that sharing your feelings, raising a concern, or trying to uphold a boundary will lead to your partner responding in a negative way, you're shrinking, my friend, and they are in total control of the relationship dynamic. You're very likely suppressing parts of yourself to be easier or more lovable. And this often reflects what many adults with CPTSD or histories of childhood trauma had to do to be the easy child. So we do this to avoid negative reactions, negative responses, or negative behaviours from caregivers or the adults in our world. Essentially, suppressing needs and really ingraining that fawn response in us. And the fawn response is a trauma response. It's where people will prioritise others' needs above their own, often at the expense of their own needs and boundaries. This is what we'll often refer to as self-abandonment or self-sacrifice. Now, when you repeat this time and time again in a relationship dynamic, you start to feel smaller, more exhausted, more anxious, or more disassociated. Now, for me, anxiety wasn't or isn't so much as the result of this. Disassociation was. Similar family of dysregulation, it just manifests itself a little bit differently. Now, there are also earlier, more subtle signs which are often mistaken for the love bubble. Your friends don't see you as much, your hobbies fade, you essentially feel a little bit less you, which the love bubble can be a thing that's relatively normal and it does level out over time. But when you couple it with someone who has emotional control of the relationship, it's a sign of what's likely to come, and it isn't good. Remember that quote, whoever cares the least controls the relationship? Yep, if you're with someone who is avoidant, dismissive or fearful, wherever they sit on the relationship spectrum, and even if we remove the avoidant label, the person who is hot and cold, the person who pulls away for the other to chase, they're in charge. If you fold your boundaries, if you chase, if you shrink yourself, you're putting them in charge of the dynamic. Now, a good litmus test, after time together, be it a specific interaction, or if you reflect on yourself over a period of time since being with this person, do you feel expanded? Do you feel like you've grown? Or do you feel smaller, contracted, and essentially just less you after time with this person? So what's the psychology behind why we might be shrinking in our relationships? Now, remember, growing pains align with the self-actualization in Maslow's hierarchy. That's the top tier, the unicorn, the drive to become your best, most authentic self. But self-actualization can't happen if the level beneath it, emotional safety, isn't solid, and not to mention all of the other levels that make up this hierarchy. If you're in a dynamic where you're constantly anxious, dismissed, or invalidated, your nervous system stays in survival mode and no growth can happen here. People with trauma or CPTSD can often have a warped compass where we've internalized the belief that love equals work or stability equals boredom. So we can very easily often confuse trauma reactivation for passion or love. So you might think that all love and relationships need work. I need to earn my partner's attention. I need to earn their love. I need to earn their validation. And it sometimes can even come back to even like thought processes that we may not consciously have, but they can be ingrained internal beliefs. Like, if it doesn't hurt a little bit, is it even real? If I'm not chasing, do they care? They need me. That must mean we're meant to be. So codependency in action, if you will. But the truth is, if we need to shrink to be loved, it's not a healthy connection. It is self-abandonment 101. So in simple terms, like I've just said, you can't self-actualize when you're more or less stuck in survival mode. You can't grow when your nervous system is constantly on alert. So this is why you can't thrive if you're trying to survive. So when you're in a relationship where you're frequently dismissed or ignored, walking on eggshells, anxiously wondering if you're too much, or you just need to completely bend yourself like a pretzel just to be able to fit into the relationship dynamic and have this person not abandon you, what it boils down to is oftentimes, and remember, this is not mental health advice, it's just my lived experience, where I'm currently at going through my studies in mental health and counselling. But a lot of the times, if you grew up in an environment where emotional safety was inconsistent or absent, whether it was through neglect, be it physical or emotional, criticism, emotional parentification, or instability, your internal compass may have been trained to point towards survival, not expansion. So for many people with developmental trauma or CPTSD, love has always felt like work or pain or performance. So when we meet someone who is stable, secure, or calm, we often don't feel drawn to them. Our body subconsciously doesn't feel drawn to them. It feels flat, it can feel foreign, it can feel boring. This is how we can often mistake trauma reactivation for love, because it feels like intensity, like chemistry, like passion. But really, it's our nervous system recognizing a familiar pattern, one where you had to earn love by shrinking or contorting yourself. So this is again where we need to be very much aware of our trauma histories. And if we find someone that feels like home after there's been some push and pull dynamics, or they've pulled some avoidant bullshit, or whatever the unhealthy relationship behaviors they've been engaging in, if they feel like home after you've gone through a cycle like that, be very fucking careful, because it can be the trauma reactivating and you may be reliving this sort of unfinished business relationship dynamic that your nervous system, potentially on a subconscious level, is trying to play out to try and heal. But if you're not aware of it, it's going to hurt. It's not going to heal. So some people want some real world examples. So I'll just share some of how shrinking pains have manifested in my most recent, and I actually don't like calling it a relationship, even though that's what it technically was, because it was actually such a subversive, harmful dynamic that ticked almost every single box for being avoidant abuse. Now, this isn't me armchair psychologizing the experience. A psychologist and a counsellor who I've seen as a client when I was processing the complete dumpster fire that was that relationship, they were the ones who actually flagged it for what it was. And where things really spin you out, and why not just myself, but also thousands of people who go through these experiences experience such cognitive dissonance, which is basically having two conflicting thoughts or ideas, is the avoidant abusers can actually be nice people. They can be kind, generous, giving, but they can also be exceptionally wounded, harmful, and abusive. Now, the abuse may or may not be conscious by them. It's often unconscious and driven by dysregulation and self-protection. When it's conscious, you're heading into real psychological pathology, and that's way outside of my purview. But regardless of the element of conscious behavior or unconscious behavior, it doesn't make it any less harmful to be on the receiving end of it. So essentially, I was in this relationship where we were worlds apart with emotional maturity, our stage of healing from life, our acceptance of our sexuality, our motivation for career, motivation for purpose. I thought I was helping her grow. I didn't realize I was disappearing. 100% the frog in boiling water experience here. Now, with this person that I was in a relationship dynamic with, there was or is a huge amount of arrested development, a very severe fearful avoidant, and a highly dysregulated nervous system. And despite learning this as I was getting months and months into the relationship dynamic and experiencing the progressive erosion of myself, like my self-worth, my sense of self, even my motivation for work and exercise, despite having this kind of surface level understanding of what was at play, I stayed. Why? Because a common thing that many of us with relationship trauma and CPTSD do, I overcorrected with my vulnerability and not shutting down and walking away. So for some context, my history of CPTSD and being historically a fearful avoidant, where 14 plus years of therapy has 100% helped move me towards being much more secure. Triggers still exist, they're still there, but I don't let them hijack my emotions or behavior, and I don't act on them because I've worked on the self-awareness and the emotional processing that comes into play when these triggers are activated. So they're there, they're just controlled, and I control them, they don't control me. So historically, when I was a bit emotionally overwhelmed, I would shut down and just walk away. Knowing that this was my past pattern of behavior, I held more space than I should in this relationship dynamic. And the unhealed parts that I still had to work on, that also came into play as well. So unhealed elements as far as building stronger boundaries, and the boundaries softened for this person for two reasons. One, I had been her, not physically, but I'd been the fearful avoidant, emotionally dysregulated, ambivalent. I'd been confused. So essentially, I'd been this fearful, avoidant person with a good heart and not wanting to hurt people, but I ended up hurting them anyways. So having this understanding of where she was and where I had been, I held space for the growth. Again, dating the potential, which you can't do. And the other element that was at play here, without sharing too much, coming back to my boundaries, I knew that if I was firmer with my boundaries and some of the, like trying to enforce some boundaries with some of the god-awful shit that she was doing, she would just fold, say it's too hard and walk away. It was if I just wait until her ex stops being a controlling dick and she actually starts seeing her therapist and so on and so forth, if I wait until all of the shit that she isn't addressing is addressed and she becomes the healthy partner she says she wants to be, things will be great. So what felt like growing together as a couple at first became me shrinking in order to just simply stay a couple, which not healthy. Not healthy how? Well, for one, I lost motivation, my work output, and I own my own business. So if I don't work, things don't get done. That slowed down. And recently I dug into the analytics of a few business stats recently, and it was wild seeing how obvious the downward trend was once I was a few months into this relationship dynamic. And even more funny, but not haha funny, was looking at my Strava, which it literally followed the same downward trend across that same timeline. So work was impacted, my engagement in physical activity was impacted. Yes, I had some health issues happening, but the downward trend affected work, health, fitness, everything. And then not to mention, and I was aware of this at the time and was, because I was, frog in boiling water, it was a little hard to dig myself out of it, but like I had stepped back from friends, I'd stepped back from some of my hobbies, and I essentially was just adjusting myself to avoid conflict, to keep the peace. Now, again, without sharing too much more of this dynamic, it was a great example of how we can often regress to the mean and why it's important to find a partner who is on or near your level. And what I mean by this is it's similar to when they say you become the sum of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Your romantic partner is literally the biggest influencer of this. So if one of you is really motivated for running, for the gym, for tennis, or for whatever it is, chances are that if this person is on the other end of the spectrum, so they are significantly less motivated or not even motivated at all for running, gym, tennis, or again, whatever it is, chances are that you may influence them to engage in exercise more, but there is also a good chance that you'll end up doing it less. Now, another example is if one of you is really work motivated and the other is like an inherited millionaire and doesn't work or have any motivation to work at all, chances are you'll eventually start to coast like they do. And it sounds extreme, but I know for a fact, because I have seen it, situations like that do arise. But what's less extreme but more common is it might be having a partner who is unemployed or coasting through life a little bit differently. So taking that millionaire status out of the equation. If you're really engaged with work, you have a purpose, you are career driven and your partner isn't, you'll either start to regress to the mean or just get frustrated and sick of being the parent in the dynamic, and eventually you may leave. So when I say regress to the mean, if you're leagues ahead in whatever element that is core to who you are and what is needed to function in a relationship and frankly build a healthy relationship, if you're leagues ahead, you are at such a high risk of shrinking pains. Not for everyone, as I said earlier, it's more risky for those with histories of trauma or abuse in whatever way that may have occurred at whatever stage of life. And then if we look at this through the avoidant discard or abrupt breakup or ghosting lens, sometimes the growing pains can actually be a factor that can push avoidants to eject themselves from the dynamic. Because it doesn't matter if it's growing pains or shrinking pains, if someone is sort of too far ahead of us or behind us, it creates internal stress. So a lot of the times, if you are leagues ahead of, say, your avoidant ex or the person that you're in a relationship with, you may be feeling the pressure because you're shrinking. They may be feeling internal pressure because they feel like they need to step up and grow. Now, this doesn't apply in every situation, and I'm not in every avoidance head. But having historically been a fearful avoidant and also recovered from being on the other side of this dynamic too, if there's almost this pressure to level up or step up, where one person is so far ahead emotionally or maturity-wise or career-wise, whatever it is, even if the person is not doing anything to make the avoidant feel this pressure to level up or step up, aside from just existing and maybe having some boundaries or trying to enforce some boundaries, this can trigger such immense shame and insecurity in the avoidant to the point that they just nope out. It is unfortunately super common. Like, how often do you see and hear people saying, oh, my ex downgraded? Now, not to be disrespectful to the next person they immediately jump into a relationship with, I actually feel sorry for a lot of them these days, as they're probably nice enough people as well, but the avoidant will often be using this person for emotional regulation because they cannot do it themselves. So with the downgrade label, which is a bit rough, but I can understand why people use it, it's often because this new person doesn't challenge or trigger the shame wounds in the avoidant. Not to mention the emotional bypassing and dopamine chasing the dysregulated avoidant is often engaging in. And this is also why you see so many rebound relationships fail after the dopamine and oxytocin high begins to dissipate. And I don't want to spend too much time on this because previous episodes have covered these topics a little bit more in depth. So like episode 8, we looked at dysregulation and the neurochemical onslaught of what causes some of the impulsive post-breakup behaviors. What else? Episode 5, we looked at a bit of the neurochemistry again and why breakups can be so dysregulating. And episode 2 and 3, we looked at how many of these frog in boiling water scenarios can actually develop. Avoidant attachment, coupled with love bombing, coupled with ADHD and early emotional intensity. So there's more to unpack in those podcast episodes if that takes your fancy. Okay, so how can we flag if this relationship dynamic is driving my growth or driving self-abandonment? Some easy questions to ask yourself and reflect on. So question 1, do I feel safe to express my needs, my boundaries and my emotions, or do I fear their reaction? Question 2, am I growing more into myself or becoming less visible in my own life? Hobbies, friends, work, all of it. Yes, relationships do change our social dynamics a bit, especially in the early phases of dating, but there's healthy supported change and unhealthy suppressed change. Big difference between the two. Question 3, do I feel energized or lighter after time together or after tackling a vulnerable topic with my partner? Or do I feel depleted and heavy? A subtle sign, but it's a big one. And question 4 is somewhat related to question 2. Have I become disconnected from the things that matter to me? Friends, creativity, health, work, hobbies, all of it. And lastly, look at the big picture from everything we've discussed. Ask yourself, am I making myself smaller just to maintain this connection? If it's growth, it will feel like expansion, even if it's a bit uncomfortable. Our growing pains. If it's shrinkage, it'll feel like compression, even if it's familiar. This is our shrinking pains. So if shrinking pains are what you're experiencing, how can you reclaim your growth? Now, there's a belief that healing can only happen inside a relationship, or that we need to be fully healed before entering into one. But both extremes actually miss the point. Some healing can definitely happen in relationships if both people are self-aware, safe, and ready. And again, if you're both on a similar level. If the gap is too big, remember, more often than not, we will regress to the mean, and you can essentially become a parent to your partner. And no thanks. Been there, done that, bought the t-shirt, never want to do it again. Remember, you want a partner, not a project. But other times, we need to do the work solo, not because we're broken, but because we're becoming whole. And sometimes the work we need to do is what needs to happen so we can actually build a safe, stable relationship. So whether you're single or in something that feels off, ask yourself, am I growing here or am I shrinking? Because love shouldn't shrink you, real connection expands you, and your light shines brighter. So just remember that you can't date potential. You can't heal if you're not safe. You cannot thrive if you are doing all that you can to survive. And you'll never be able to step into your fullest self if you are in a relationship dynamic and you are doing the emotional work of two. That's emotional regression. It's not growth. So if this episode landed, please subscribe, review, or share it with someone who might benefit from this message. And if you want to go deeper, I have created a guided journaling session for you to help unpack where you may have felt yourself shrinking, or trying to figure out if you are shrinking and how you might be able to reclaim that space again. That's linked in the guided journaling playlist that is available at the Reconnection Co on YouTube. So thank you again for joining me. Take care, and I'll see you next time.